with companies that are mid-range successes, right? And depending on how they structure those companies, how they fund them, how they run them, how they choose to hire for them, how they choose to do customer acquisition and invest in growth versus profitability, that success can either be something that makes them, incredibly happy and brings a lot of joy to their employees and to their customers, or it can be something where they're, always looking in the mirror in the morning and saying, you're not good enough, and why aren't I like these other companies, and how are we going to get our growth rates up, and those sorts of things.
Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 255 with Rand Fishkin. Rand returns to Future Squared as the founder of SparkToro. He was previously the co-founder of Moz and Inbound.org. He's dedicated his professional life to helping people do better marketing through the Whiteboard Friday video series and his blog. If you feed him great pasta or great whiskey, he'll give you the cheat code to rank number 1 on Google. Long-time listeners of Future Squared might remember Rand from episode number 22, when we discussed content marketing for large organizations, as well as, more importantly, was Rand's tussle with depression, and how he ultimately had to step down as the CEO of the company he founded. While Rand has gone on to start another company, he hasn't done so without coming to a number of confronting realizations about building a company that he has captured in his brand new book, Lost and Founder, a painfully honest field guide to the startup world. This book will form the basis of my conversation with Rand. It's refreshing to read the take of a respected founder like Rand on the truth about building a company and how it's not all unicorns and ping pong tables. Having read the book and having found it very informative, I couldn't wait to get linked up with Rand again after more than 2 years to dive in. In this episode, we discussed why startups don't need venture capital to get going, why founding a top 5 startup won't necessarily make you rich, the benefits of starting with a service-based business before building a product, the importance of values alignment in hiring and firing, how to keep your energy and enthusiasm levels high, radical transparency, hiring for diversity of what you can't see, not just what you can, and his new company, SparkToro. With that, let's kick things off as I welcome back to the show the one and only Rand Fishkin. Welcome back to the show, Rand.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Good to be here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show. It's been over 2 years since we last spoke. And the last time that we spoke, you were fresh out of Tasmania's Sullivan's Cove whiskey. Have you managed to pick up another bottle?
I have managed to pick up 3 more.
Fantastic. Were these imported bottles, or did you manage to make your way down to sunny Tasmania?
Oh, no. Sadly, I had to settle for the imports, but they're still incredible.
Glad to hear it, my man. Look, it's been a couple of years, and obviously you've been busy in that time. You've set up a new business called SparkToro, which we'll talk about later in today's show. And you've also published a book. And the last time we spoke, you opened up about some of the emotional challenges you went through building Moz. This ultimately culminated with your stepping down as CEO. And this is effectively what your new book is all about. The book's called Lost and Founder, and you've said that it's a painfully honest field guide to the startup world. First and foremost, congratulations on penning what, in my opinion, was a great tell-all book.
Oh, thank you very much. It's incredibly kind.
So what I really liked about the book, Rand, is that it tells a story from the perspective of your building Moz, which, as you've put it, is neither a billion-dollar success nor a tragic failure. But if you read Mashable and TechCrunch, as you've said, they tend to cover companies on either side of this spectrum, the big winners and the big failures, not so much the middle ground where most people find themselves. Why do you think that this middle ground tends to be overlooked when it comes to the tech press?
I think because it doesn't generate the same interest in terms of headlines, right? So sort of profitable company continues growing is a boring headline.
Yeah.
Right. It's not interesting at all. I think you are looking for, you're looking for either here's this incredible outlier, 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million, and what did they do? Or here's this fantastic failure that crashed to the ground, and let's all sort of look at what happened to them.
Yeah.
And those are, those stories. Well, unfortunately, the crashing to the ground failure is very, very common in the venture-backed startup world. I think 5-year survival rates once you raise venture is something under 40%. So it's actually much more likely than not that you're going to crash and burn. But that being said, I think that many startup founders end up with companies that are mid-range successes, right? And depending on how they structure those companies, how they fund them, how they run them, how they choose to hire for them, how they choose to do customer acquisition and invest in growth versus profitability, that success can either be something that makes them incredibly happy and brings a lot of joy to their employees and to their customers, or it can be something where they're, always looking in the mirror in the morning and saying, you're not good enough. And why aren't I like these other companies? And how are we going to get our growth rates up and those sorts of things? And I worry a lot, I think especially in geographies like yours and like mine, right? In these big cities around the world, I think there's this penetration of the culture of Silicon Valley startups that biases us to think that we all have to be Facebook, Google, Uber, Tesla, or we're not interesting.
Yeah,
we're either someone or we're no one, and that's crap. It's a terrible way to live, to compare yourself only to these few, oftentimes very, very lucky outliers, and ignore the reality that there are a million ways to build a great business and to make that a wonderful part of your life. It's just that not enough of us are doing it. Yeah. And it feels like, does it feel like to you? It feels like to me, because I'm in the startup world, it feels like, oh, what a great time to do a startup. What a great time to be a startup. There's so much attention and energy in this field. And then you look at the statistics, and I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the United States, we are at a 40-year low for entrepreneurship. There have never been fewer people employed by small businesses, never been fewer small businesses started in the economy since I was born. That's disturbing.
Yeah. And I can't speak for the statistics in Australia versus the US. One thing I will point to is a quote from Ben Horowitz, who basically said that the barriers to entry today for starting a business are perhaps lower than they've ever been, but the courage bar is as high as ever. And I guess that points to the fact that so many startups fail, despite the fact that they may be heavily funded, which in many cases can actually be a curse rather than a blessing, because it's not easy. And something you pointed on, or something you touched on there, I draw parallels between the tech news and also the day-to-day news. If you watch CNN or Fox News, they're not going to say, "Oh, a plane landed successfully at JFK Airport today." It's only going to, it's only going to be the crash and burn that people are going to report, because that profitable business, or as they say, that rabbit, the real actual business building interesting technology that's profitable, that's growing slowly, nobody wants to hear about that. It's just not exciting. And if you're constantly comparing your company to an Uber or an Airbnb, it's kind of like life. If you're constantly comparing yourself to the next person, you'll always find someone that's better than you at something, but you should be focused on being better than you were yesterday. And it's the same with your company.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think a big part of maybe one of the challenges that prevents a lot of entrepreneurs from entering into business. Well, I think there's a bunch of things. One is obviously declining real wealth of the middle class, and the basically most of the gains from the economy of the last 40 years have gone to the very, very wealthy. And I think when that wealth concentration happens, you don't get as many people feeling like I can start a business or having the freedom and flexibility to do that. But I'm not sure on this podcast whether we can fix that problem. But
you can try.
Sure. Yeah, let's give it a step. But I will say that I think one of the challenges that we might be able to help some folks overcome, and that certainly I am trying to overcome, is this idea that in order to start a company, you require institutional funding. And it has to be in this one particular model. I think that the amplification of venture-backed startups in the tech world has actually created an environment where a lot of entrepreneurs who think, oh, well, maybe I should build a tech company, change their mind when they think, oh, but I don't think I can raise venture capital.
Yeah.
And just because you can't do one doesn't mean you can't do the other. That is baloney.
Yeah.
And I think if we could dispel that myth, we could maybe encourage a lot more people who have interesting ideas, who could break off and do something on their own, who could spend a few nights and weekends creating something to get it off the ground. And I think the internet still holds incredible promise. It's this incredible delivery system for potential connections. There are much lower barriers to entry in terms of sales and marketing and reach and customer acquisition than there ever have been. But yeah, I think a lot of us are sort of feel like we can't do it because we don't have the right connections or network or a fundable business idea.
Yeah, and I see this all the time amongst startups, not just in Australia but across the globe, especially first-time entrepreneurs. Like you've said, there is this misconception that in order to build a business, the first thing I need to do is raise funding. And I'll get up and I'll head out to one of these demo days for an accelerator program. First-time entrepreneurs, all they really have is an idea. Maybe they have the semblance of a prototype, and they're asking for $1 million at a $3 or $4 million valuation. And ultimately, the question is, well, why can't you at least build a cash flow positive service business to begin with? Because obviously there is a tendency, if you want VC, then you need to build a globally scalable business that can deliver the massive returns that VCs require to offset all of the losses in their portfolio. But for some reason or another, for precisely that reason, Silicon Valley and the tech community look down on service businesses, even though, as you've put it, you're twice as likely to succeed building a service business.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's actually a beautiful freedom that comes from not having institutional money, right? Because once those institutional dollars come in, I think, my story can serve a lot of folks in this respect, right? So I think many people, I know many of my friends who run consulting businesses or small software companies or independent businesses of all kinds, we hang out, we sort of talk, and they're like, well, Moz is a $50 million a year company now, and and you own a quarter of this company, and so my assumption is you must have money, and what is this 15-year-old Kia that you and your wife are driving? Yeah. I don't understand, right? That kind of thing. Actually, I shouldn't say that. We just had to replace it. Now we have a several years old Ford, but regardless, the reality is that until and unless you produce a return, which means not just getting to a point where your company is worth, what would return a multiple to your investors, but a meaningful multiple, and you actually have an exit offer, meaning someone's willing to buy your company, or you're sort of $100 million plus in revenue and ready to go public and do an IPO. Those the criteria by which you can have a financially successful outcome, and not really anything in between. You can sometimes, if your company's growing fast enough and there's a lot of demand and you're very, very hot, you can sometimes sell private stock, but that's a very tough transaction to get done. I recently tried to do that myself with no success. And it's I think that surprises people that there's no sort of liquidity, and you can't really pay yourself more, right?
Yeah.
Your salary is capped by your board of directors, and that, which is the right thing to do, right? It's capped because that's how it's meant to be structured, and those are the docs you agreed to. So you could get paid as much as, if you're the CEO and founder, maybe you're making $300,000 or $400,000 a year. But I have friends who have consulting businesses that do $2 or $3 million a year, and they're taking home twice that.
Yep.
Right? Because they have an LLC, they just take the profits.
Exactly. And, this is something that Eric Paley, managing partner at Founder Collective, wrote about on TechCrunch in an article called Toxic VC and the Marginal Dollar Problem. And you put forward the case in your book that, you could build a company worth, say, $40 million and deliver a 10x return to your VC, but they may see more potential and they may try and push you to go for, 200 million or 300 million so that they can then begin to deliver that 3x return to their fund size. But that 200 or 300 million never comes. The size of the business flatlines or maybe goes backwards. You've then got to pay a liquidation preference to your VCs before you see a single dollar. And ultimately, you could end up with little to no money after all is said and done.
Yeah, I think it was it FanDuel last week or 2 weeks ago that was sold for, I want to say north of $700 million, and the founders didn't make a penny.
Yeah, that's a great example of it. Yeah,
and that was incredible. It was eye opening to so many people, right? Because this company had been, just an extraordinary growth story. I mean, they were Uber, they were Google in their space, and to see them, sort of have this incredible exit, which is, I think, was it to Barclays in the UK? I can't remember exactly which firm bought them.
Details. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, and these founders, the founders of FanDuel, I think they felt like they spent the last 15 years building this extraordinary thing, and come what should be payday, they're walking away. They're walking away with nothing. I hope that's eye opening for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and I think there's so much more value in building a service business, at least to start with. And you put forward the case in your book that the beauty of a service business, not only do you maintain control initially, but by not being reliant on external funding where you're being driven to hit these big targets, you're not going to be hiring people you probably don't need. You're not going to be spending money on marketing campaigns that sell a product that doesn't really have a value proposition yet. You're going to be focused on figuring out what customers are actually willing to pay for. And by figuring out what customers actually want, you can use that then to inform what that product's going to be and increase the likelihood of that product actually being successful.
Yeah, and I want to also put forward the idea that if you believe that your idea requires funding and you want to build a product business, you're not interested in building a services business first, it is still possible to do that. And that's exactly what we're doing with SparkToro. We did raise $1.3 million, but it wasn't from institutional investors. And because of that, the requirements are very different. We structured the docs in a very, very different kind of way. And in fact, we've made them open source. So I worked with our attorneys, paid a little bit extra, and open sourced our documents for our fundraising round so that anyone out there can go and use our docs to raise a round if they would like to. And it's very investor friendly and very founder friendly, but it doesn't have the same requirements that venture capital comes with. And I think there's a lot more creative options out there for founders to build their companies, fund their companies, than there have been in the past.
Yeah. We may, I'll look that up and I'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. I think that could be a very valuable doc for some of our listeners. But aside from that, you're right. There's so many other avenues. People tend to default to VC when thinking about startup funding, but whether it's, early stage angel investment or whether it's even tapping into some of the emerging funding models such as your ICOs, whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, a tool is only as good as how you use it, right? So despite all the scams that are going on in this space, it has the potential to be a very powerful decentralized funding mechanism for startups out there who don't want to be pegged to institutional funding that comes with VCs.
Sure. I mean, Kickstarter and Patreon and Indiegogo, these are all also options. And I know a bunch of folks. I have a friend who started a board game here in Seattle and he launched it on Kickstarter. It's basically a landing page. Yeah. It's sort of an experiment of, does anyone want this thing? And people got so excited about it that was hugely oversubscribed. They made the game, they shipped it. People love it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of options.
There are definitely a lot of options. Okay, so we've talked about funding. I wanted to jump across and talk about hiring, which is another key component that you talk about in your book. And one sort of topic that's been making the rounds in the startup ecosystem, I guess, in the last year or two is this whole notion of radical transparency. Ray Dalio made it famous in his book Principles, and what was it, Kim Scott in her book Radical Candor. And ultimately, it's about just being open with people. If there's an underperformer in your team, it's easy to ignore them, hope things change. It's much harder to have that difficult conversation, that thoughtful conversation around the why, document instances of unwanted behavior, have direct conversations with the team member, and if necessary, coach them to better performance. And like you say in your book, you might still end up firing them, but that's the thing about transparency. The outcome can be remarkably different if you do have that conversation with them. And if you do end up firing them, that's not necessarily a bad thing for them. At least they've got the feedback. They know where they did wrong. And perhaps they're just not a good fit. Maybe there's just no values alignment with the organization. But it seems today that a lot of people perhaps are scared to have those conversations because it's just not in our innate nature as human beings to have conversations that make us feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's something that, when I was younger, it scared me shitless, frankly, right? To have this experience of, I need to go have a difficult conversation with someone who's working for me about whether they're doing their job well or their performance on a particular project. It really was a scary prospect, and something I think I tried to avoid. It's the same way a lot of hard conversations go, right? If you are in a relationship with a partner and you need to break up with them, that's an intense, difficult conversation, right? That a lot of people will try and sidestep and avoid, and then lots of people get upset about those conversations and how they go because people weren't upfront about them. And I think this is just human nature. And so if we can upgrade our ability to have those difficult conversations by leaning into them, by saying, I am going to do my best to care personally and show that I care personally and prove that to this person. And also, I will not hold back in terms of challenging them directly, right? Mm-hmm. Saying, hey, these are the things that I expected. These are the things that you delivered. These two don't match up. And as a result, we can't continue this. And I think also creating those expectations early on rather than sort of jumping in 6 months into a project and saying, hey, I expected you to do this. And them saying, you never told me you expected me to do that. Right. So that part is important as well. And I think when it comes to hiring, a lot of this is structuring the conversations you have with people that you bring on your team in a little bit more formal, well-organized ways than what we're used to. And that is, that requires work and effort. It also requires thoughtfulness around the job that you want someone to do and what you don't want them to do. And then I think it requires regular check-ins and, good monitoring systems. And to the extent that you can build them, I also think having a structure that includes company core values, company beliefs around how work should be done and how people should treat each other and shouldn't, what makes someone, worthy of being hired and brought onto the team and promoted, and why you would let someone go and why you wouldn't hire someone, writing all that stuff out, amplifying it to the company, that makes a big difference. It's shocking, especially if you live up to it. If you don't live up to it, then people stop believing it and they don't trust you at all. But if you can document it and then you live up to it, great things happen.
Yeah, definitely documenting it, but also practicing it and sharing those stories that align with those values. Because what we see in a lot of particularly larger, more traditional organizations is they'll have the company values plastered on the wall, and they'll usually be really generic values that most of the FTSE 1000 share, right? Like collaboration, empathy, trust, integrity. It's like, man, these should be just your normal human values. These aren't company values. Like these are just status quo things. Like, what do you really believe in? Like things like radical transparency, for example, could be a company value. And you've talked about the whole notion of values alignment in your book, where if you don't have values alignment between what the company stands for, what say the leaders of the organization are about, and what everyone else in the team is about, then it's effectively like playing tug of war, and it's going to be really challenging to move forward in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think one of the things that I would urge leaders to do as well is to make sure that as they become leaders in their organization, make sure that the values that you are espousing are ones that you actually believe. Because it sucks to live an inauthentic life where you sort of, I don't actually believe in this. This is not how I am in my personal life, but I guess I got to go put on this face at work. I think you're going to be much worse at that, much more unhappy with that than if you actually put the values that you believe in into place in your company. And so I think that takes a lot of self-awareness and self-reflection from leadership. And I think it sometimes takes hard conversations, right? So, new CEO comes into an organization, they might need to say to the team and to the previous CEO and, the leadership, hey, we're changing. This is now what we believe, right? This is now the new things, and I'm going to build the organization around these things. And if they don't match up with you, no hard feelings. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. No one did something wrong. We just don't share the same beliefs. That's okay. Go find your bliss, and I'm going to build my team here in this way. And I think that, that is a really productive way to go, especially, much better than the alternative.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And on the values, one thing that jumps out in your book is not just hiring for, say, the diversity you can see, like people's skin color and gender and whatnot, but also the diversity you can't see, such as their past experience, their upbringing, their different ideological worldview. Because, it's easy for people to default to diversity of gender and everything else, but really diversity of thought is a totally different ball game that can deliver a lot more value to your organization. Yeah.
I think that's true. The only one I might take issue with is ideological worldview and core values tend to be quite similar, and you do want people who share your core values. And so I might encourage folks to generally speaking, make sure that there's alignment of those things, because you want diversity of people, you want shared beliefs.
Yeah.
And that combination seems to be the one that correlates best with high-performing companies, high-performing teams.
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to the values alignment piece and making sure everybody's moving forward in the right direction. And it's funny, I've been reading a lot about biological evolution and how more conservative voters tend to have more hyperactive amygdalas, and therefore they're more prone to, they're less prone to take risks, and they're more about certainty and order and discipline. And they make great, say, managers of existing organizations that are just about executing on the status quo. Whereas liberal voters tend to have a more hyperactive frontal cortex and a less hyperactive amygdala, which means they're way more open to risk, and they tend to be all about trying new things and experimenting. And in organizations that are in the earlier stage of their life cycle, they tend to make better leaders. So it's just interesting. So if you're trying to, and that comes back to that ideological worldview. A conservative voter is probably going to be less likely to thrive in a role that's all about experimentation and challenging the status quo.
Could be. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of statistical stuff on like which way you vote. I would also say my suspicion is that one country's conservative voters are another country's liberal voters. I find this often with my with my friends who come from overseas, and they come to the United States and they sort of go, well, I'm a conservative voter where I'm from, but here in the United States, I'm pretty sure I'm very left of center. Yeah. And that's, often really different. So yeah, it might be one of those things where you're definitely looking for a combination of risk taking versus status quo enablement, all throughout the life of a company. And I think that's a definitely a challenging thing. mean, one issue that I have found fascinating is that a number of the folks who joined Moz in its earliest years were not particularly strong. I wouldn't say they were risk takers, but they were comfortable with and knew that they would be walking into a place where change happened often.
Yeah.
And I think that the degree to which you can create that expectation effectively is really, really valuable, right? If you can say to someone, hey, we're hiring you to do this, but this organization is in its very early days. And as a result, this job will probably look nothing like this in 12 months or 18 months or 2 years. And you might not be the right person for this job. And this job might not be the right fit for you. And if you're comfortable with that, like if you're cool to say, hey, I want to upgrade my skills and see what this is like and give it a try. And if it doesn't work, no hard feelings. And if it does work, awesome, amazing. I can't wait to, grow with the company. If you're on board for that, terrific. If you're not on board for that, this isn't the place for you. And I actually regret the fact that it was not until later in Moz's life that I started having those conversations in a more forthright manner. And I think that's just something that you learn with time as a leader of a scaling, company that's growing from whatever, 10 to 20 people or 20 to 100 or 100 to more. So I would certainly tell folks that if you can have that conversation, if you're that type of company, that works really well. And likewise, if you're a company that is, hey, we need to deliver consistently, right? Performance is important, but so too is stability. And as a result, we need to make sure that you're someone who can do this job day in, day out, won't get bored and tired of it, is going to be excited by the small amount of change, relative small amount of change that happens over time as the industry progresses, right? And we have to make changes in order to keep up. But this is about delivering consistent results. And there are people who love that, right? So
well, yeah, I mean,
have those conversations too.
Definitely. And, as human beings, I guess we tend to default to taking action because it makes us feel busy and like we're actually moving the needle. So when it comes to hiring, you just want to hire that person and you don't want to spend, a month or two looking for them. So you're like, okay, well, you'll do. But by doing that, you ultimately can create a lot more heartache down the line for them and for the organization because maybe they're just not the right fit. And then you've got to go through the whole process of finding someone else, the hiring, the training, the onboarding, the lost productivity that comes with it. And just by being forthright, like you've said, having those conversations up front, maybe spending a little bit more time, you'll find the right person. And that person is going to not only contribute to the organization, but be a part of the organization for longer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one more thing I was going to say on the hiring front, I think it can be, if at all possible, I would urge founders and leaders to, especially in early stages, write job descriptions themselves. Mm-hmm. First off, invest in your writing skills because I don't think there's anything better than being able to clearly communicate your ideas crisply and effectively across written communication, meaning in your website copy and your PR statements and the things that you send internally to your company and your emails. And just there's so much written communication that leaders are required to do, especially in early stage companies, that I don't think you can outsource that. I think that's a crucial skill, right? That's just required. So I would urge people to invest in that. And then the second thing is write your job descriptions yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? Write the here's why you should work here, here's why you shouldn't work here. Put those both in the listing. Right? Here's who should apply, here's who should not apply, here's why, here's the kind of company we want to be, here's the kind of company we don't want to be. Here's what if a year from now you tell me you accomplished these, here's what I'm going to be thrilled about. And if a year from now you tell me you couldn't do these things, I'm going to be okay with that if you got the first set done. Right? If you can put that on paper, right, in an email, in a doc, you're set. Yeah, that's gonna be a huge help.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we use a similar process where we say who are we after, and who are we not after? And under the not after column, we'd have attributes such as people who make excuses, people who don't take ownership, etc., etc. And these attributes basically align with our values, because ultimately we're about, hey, if someone stuffs up, that's fine. We're all human beings. We do stuff up from time to time, but let's take ownership of that. How did we stuff up? How can we prevent this from happening again in future? And just being open and transparent about that, rather than defaulting to, oh, it's because of X, it's because of Y, because then we're never really taking ownership. We're never empowering ourselves to make the organization better. We're just playing the victim card.
Totally. One of my favorite things is I don't particularly mind excuses. I think it's fine to tell me, hey, I could not get this done because. Just tell me as soon as you know.
Yeah.
Don't wait until the project is about to be delivered. Don't wait until there's someone, who's now waiting on you. Tell everyone ASAP, right? So that the first time you think, gosh, I am now 2 days behind on this thing that I thought I was going to be there. And I know why. It's because, as I was writing this code, I found that crawling this particular website had these additional things. So I had to build a secondary thing. Great. Awesome. Send that out to everyone. People will be like, oh, it's not that they're not getting their work done. They're getting more work done than they promised because they encountered an unexpected need for additional work or whatever, right? Or they had a sickness in their family, or they, had a technology problem with their machine, or they were asked to do this other thing by this other team that was very high demand. Great, fine. Just communicate early.
Yeah.
That is a huge requirement for me, at least, right? That makes me just feel like I can trust you 10 times more than, if you say you can do something and then shows up on the day and it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Or if something is slowing you down, but you don't actually raise that with anyone until someone raises it with you. And then that's going to create this sense of having to constantly check in on you and micromanage you, which nobody likes. But as a leader, you don't want to do that. And as a team member, you don't want to be micromanaged. But unless you're communicating effectively and giving people that sense of trust in your work, in your approach to every day, then it's either going to be micromanaging or just leaving the organization.
Yeah. The other thing I think is huge is I place a huge amount of value on people who can give good estimates for their work. I think that shows that you have real experience. And I also particularly like when, and a lot of engineers I've worked with, the best engineers I've worked with have done this. They'll say, our current estimate is that this is going to be 8 weeks of work. However, that could fluctuate by as much as 2 or 3 times that amount, and we will be able to tell you in 2 weeks whether it's fluctuating that much.
Yeah.
Amazing, right? That's my heaven.
Yeah. One of my pet peeves, man, whether it's working with developers or whether it's as a customer of another organization, is when people set expectations that just aren't met. And not only are they not met, but there's no communication to tell you that those expectations won't be met until after the fact. When the question is asked, it's like, hey, man, I was kind of expecting this last week. What's happening? Oh, yeah, we encountered this, and now it's going to be delivered in a week from now. It's like, okay, well, perhaps you can communicate that earlier. Right. So
transparency works both ways.
It's
right?
huge.
Radical transparency works both ways. It is important for the provider and the asker of anything, and I think that can save a lot of people a lot of heartache.
Definitely. Man, I just wanted to wrap up with a couple more questions, and one is on your energy and enthusiasm levels. Obviously, it's been a big couple of years since we last spoke, and building a startup or building a business, you've been at it for quite a while now with Moz, with SparkToro now. It can take it out of you, and obviously having values alignment with the organization, what it stands for, its underlying purpose, can keep you getting up in the morning, can keep you investing in the business. But having said that, the dopamine hits that come with starting something and the dopamine hits that come with sustaining something are two totally different things. It's like chasing the dragon. So what keeps you going, Rand?
Gosh, there's a good number, but I will have to say this, which is, I was incredibly sad to leave Moz. Obviously, I'd spent 17 years sort of there and building that company. But building SparkToro just over the last 3 months since I left has been so rewarding, so much fun, such a good fit for me personally and professionally. I think that, when people say, find your bliss, I kind of found mine. I didn't know it was there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if I hadn't been nudged or sort of, pushed, I wouldn't have made this leap, and that would have been really sad. So yeah, I certainly, I encourage folks to go experiment with these things. I think that often fear is holding us back. I know it held me back.
Yeah. And
the other thing, oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say, in terms of energy, there are a few things. So I think the last time we spoke 2 years ago, I had recently, gone through severe depression at the end of 2013, all the way into 2015. And I wrote about that in the book as well, and in a very popular blog post. And those, the experience of going through that, I think, was very life altering. I think it gave me a lot more empathy and sympathy for people who experience those things. And I think it also gave me some really healthy habits, right? Because I changed a lot of things about my life. I changed how much I work, right? I no longer try and do 60 or 70 hour work weeks. I know that I'm not as productive in hours 45 through 70 in a given week. And that I can get an extraordinary amount accomplished in only 4 or 5 hours in a day, so long as I have that time uninterrupted to nail what I need to nail. I also find that giving my brain time off from work makes me more productive in the hours that I do work. And I think this is universally true for pretty much every human being, and very well studied in research, but not practiced very well in tech and startup worlds. And so that is another thing that I would tell to folks, right, is that your time off from work is important. It makes you more effective. It makes you more efficient. It makes your work more high quality. And there's plenty of research to back this up if you want to go check that out. Other things, I mean, the standard stuff that folks talk about. But every morning when I wake up, I do physical therapy exercises, right? I do, push-ups, and I do pull-ups, and I do a bunch of crunches and other leg stuff. And it helps my back health. I have degenerative disc disease, and just those things, being healthier, eating only a little bit healthier, but getting exercise. I have a Fitbit now, and I sort of track that.
I did see you eat a ramen noodle burger while you're in New York recently, Rand.
Yeah, I make occasional allowances. I have a little dram of whiskey or two.
Of course,
every few days, but. Yeah, I think that those things, sleep probably is the biggest one of all, more so even than exercise or diet, is getting enough sleep, which is, now they're saying 8 hours to 8.5 hours is where you want, not, more than 7. And I'm trying to aim for that. And that's actually worked really well for me as well.
Yeah.
Made me more efficient. So those are all things that help keep my energy up.
Fantastic. I love what you said there, and the whole notion of 4 to 5 hours of deep uninterrupted work is way more effective than, say, 16 hours of grinding out shallow level work where you're constantly at the mercy of your email and constant interruptions. Yet, the startup world glorifies that, but realistically, you're so much more effective when you do manage to get into flow and focus for 5 hours a day. And also sleep. The whole nootropic movement in the Valley and in the startup ecosystem, biohacking, man, sleep is the number one biohack in the world. And if you're only getting 4 hours a night, you're going to pay for it in the long term.
Yeah. I mean, look at these guys, right? Like your LeBron James and all these other folks, who they'll do the like hyperbaric chamber. They'll aim for 9 hours in bed every day. I mean, they're onto something, right? Like they know what they're doing.
Of course. Well, the results speak for themselves. And last but not least, Rand, do you want to just tell us a quick bit about SparkToro?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, we're still in the very early stages of building the product, which is probably 9 to 12 months away. But we do have a couple of free tools that I urge folks to check out. If you're in the web marketing world, we have this free tool called Trending, where you can connect your Twitter account and see sort of what everyone in the web marketing world is talking about. It's like a hacker news or a tech meme for web marketing. And then we also have a free tool for analyzing your Twitter account that's called SparkScore. And a lot of folks have been having, I think like 10,000 people have checked that out just in the last, 5-6 days since we launched. So that's been exciting to see as well. And over the long term, we're trying to build something that will help people discover the publications and people that influence their audience, and make that an easier process for entrepreneurs and for marketers. And we hope to have that in about a year.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. Hopefully we can make that 11,000 that check out that tool by the end of the
Awesome.
week. Fantastic. Well, thanks again for giving up some time to appear on Future Squared again, Rand. It's been a pleasure reconnecting, and look forward to reconnecting in a couple of years' time.
I look forward to it, Steve. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers, Rand. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that we're publishing on a regular basis, just head over to futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll get the very next one.